world situation of Jews during that era. And as you may have seen, it wasn't a pleasant situation for world Jewry at the time. Today's opening screen is about the Khmelnytsky riots, the Cossacks in Tach Vetat, the year 1648, 1649, when there was tremendous persecution of Jews, and they say about 300,000 Jews were murdered in that time. Again, the years 1648, 1649. The Baal Shem Tov comes on the scene today, this 18th of Elul, 50 years later, in the year 1648. There is an acronym for it in Hebrew. That acronym is called Nachat. What's Nachat? The year Tav Nun Chet. If you rearrange it, it gives you the word Nachat. He brought a joy, a pleasure to the world. And that word Nachat as well is the spelling of 1698 in Hebrew. And that's the year that the Baal Shem Tov was born to his parents. Somewhere, I know he was a rabbi in the city of Mezhebush. That's where his shul was stationed. But he was a traveling rabbi. The region where he was born was somewhere in Ukraine. That's where Mezhebush is, although I'm not sure if that's where he was born. Like I said yesterday, he was the only child born to his elderly parents, Rabbi Eliezer and Rivka. They were blessed in their old age to have a child due to their very kind hospitality, care, generosity for others. It was the Achnasat Orchim, and one of their guests said he wants to bless them, and they were blessed with a child whom they named Yisrael. Sadly, he was orphaned at a young age. Both his parents passed away. But while his father was lying on his deathbed, his father called him in and told him these words, which I just put on the screen. And these are the words with which he lived by and which would become the pillars of the approach that Hasidus started with and that he began to teach. What were these words? In Yiddish he said, Mein Kind, my son, or my child, sollst nicht meide haben vor keinem, mehr nicht vor Gott Baruch Hu allein. You should fear nothing, no one, but God alone. Sollst lieb haben mit dem ganzen Flamm von deiner Neshama jeden Eden. You should love your fellow Jew, every single Jew, with the full flame of your soul. Wer soll nicht sein, wie soll nicht sein, regardless who or where they are. So, we don't know too much more about his childhood. Just this anecdote. Here it's recorded in Likutei Diburim, the writings of the previous Rebbe, but this was the famed words that the Baal Shem Tov was told by his father. And other than the fact that he was an only child and he loved to spend time alone in the forest around him, you know, they grew up there in the Russian area, the region, there was a lot of forest, yeah? It's true, it's page 770. See the significance. Other than those themes, there's not much known about his childhood because he was born as you know, elderly parents, passed away in his young age. But when he grew older, he became, like I said yesterday, a balagola. He would be what they called in those days also a helper to bring the kids to the school. You know, a bus driver called it in our days. And he would accompany the children on the way to and from school each day. Today it might be on a school bus, and back then it was probably in a wagon. And in this capacity, he spent much of his time with a lot of the small children and seeing their plight, noticing their personal struggles, their challenges, their difficulties, what they were going through. And he was able to instill in them a strong basis of their Jewish identity, of their love for Hashem, of their passion to study Torah, of their excitement to do mitzvahs. That was what the Baal Shem Tov was able to pick up as a young driver of kids to the schools. And throughout his early life, he studied. He was very reclusive. We're talking about in his first 36 years. In the first 36 years of his life, he wasn't a renowned rabbi. He really spent not much time in the public space, but he was known to study a tremendous amount of both the revealed Torah, which is the Mishnah, the Talmud, the laws, and a tremendous amount of the mystical dimensions of the Torah, which we're going to expound upon today. And that's where he achieved a tremendous amount of spiritual greatness of this knowledge and understanding of the mystical elements to teach. But he really was like a hidden tzaddik. To the casual observer, nobody really knew much about him. He appeared to be a simple, ordinary Jew. Yeah.
Did he leave any writings and all these translated into
Yeah, there are writings of the Baal Shem Tov, not very much. Like the Arizal, much of his teachings were more by his students, but there are writings of the Baal Shem Tov, Keter Shem Tov, and some others, but a lot more is from his students relating much of his teachings.
on Sefaria or only in Yiddish?
I'm not certain, but I'm sure on Chabad.org you could find it. No doubt the Chabad Publishing House has certainly promoted it. Yes, please. So it is available, yeah. Now, but at this stage, he certainly didn't write books yet. He was still just a young man, and not much was known about him. I don't think people necessarily picked up that he was extraordinary yet. He definitely was known to be caring for his students. He was their driver, nice, good, caring driver. But all this changed today in 1734. How old did he turn? 36 years old on his birthday, Chai Elul, 1734. On that day, he received, as he said, a heavenly directive to reveal himself as a scholar, as a tzaddik, as a righteous person who was to initiate a whole new change in the Jewish way of life. And so the Baal Shem Tov harnessed the Gothic dimension of Kabbalah to teach the masses and helping them to reshape the way that they saw their relationship with God. Because as I mentioned yesterday, there was this gap, there was a division between the scholarly and the simple Jews. There was a wide gap. Some were considered elitist, and the others were just the simple peasant type of people. Many looked with disdain on those who didn't study much. There was tremendous depression amongst lots of the Jews. They experienced persecution and riots and pogroms. Although yesterday I painted a beautiful picture of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. In Poland, people said, Pauline, here we could settle till Mashiach comes. Yet that all changed with all the pogroms, riots, anti-Semitism. And he knew that he had to do something radical to uplift the Jewish people. But don't forget, there was another aspect that caused a lot of people to be down, and that was Shabtai Tzvi, the fake Messiah. Shabtai Tzviism was something that also caused more despair for Jewish people, because finally they thought their Mashiach is on the horizon, and all of a sudden this fellow comes along, he proclaims to be Mashiach, and then he converts to Islam. So the Baal Shem Tov faced a tremendous uphill battle. Don't forget, a lot of people viewed him with skepticism. They were very skeptical and maybe even cynical towards him, because looking at his, who is this guy? What is he doing? What is he changing? Right? What is he achieving? But slowly but surely, people came to embrace him. And that's how he got this name. His reputation followed him. And he was called Baal Shem Tov. It was a nickname. That wasn't his surname. Yes. Why was he, Besht is an acronym of Baal Shem Tov. Why was he called that? It was a nickname that he gained as a reputation for all of his good. So it wasn't, now, don't forget, this was more probably amongst the simple people. The scholars were looking a little bit more cynically at him. What are you intermingling with the simple people? What are you trying to lift them up to our level? We're the elite. We're the better, the hechere mention. The Baal Shem Tov realized it can't just be fluff. It's important to infuse joy and happiness and an ecstatic feeling and love of Hashem and our fellow Jews, but there also had to be substance. So like the Arizal before him, the Baal Shem Tov understood that the way to revive the Jewish nation from its collective faint was to inject it with the elixir of the Torah's inner dimension. The Arizal did that to the Jews who survived the Spanish Inquisition, who were very down and depressed. Don't forget, they all were uprooted from their homes. They experienced persecution in the Iberian Peninsula. And now the same thing was happening 200 years later in the Eastern European area. And therefore, he thought, learn from his predecessor, learn from the Arizal. Looking around, European Jews were very strict. They adhered to halacha, to Jewish law, which is the body of Judaism. But he said they needed more than that. They needed to be taught about the soul, the neshama of Yiddishkeit. And that's what he did superbly well. Remember, he spent his earlier years studying this mysticism, the inner dimension of Torah. So he helped, at this stage now, he helped open the hearts and the minds of so many Jewish people by showing them a glimpse, a taste of what Kabbalah shows us, what lies behind the surface of all of reality. We're not just talking about, when you study halacha, you get the body of Judaism. You understand what you're supposed to do, right? But when you study Kabbalah, you go deeper, you go behind the surface, so to say. And through his promulgating the teachings of Kabbalah, just like the Arizal did in Israel, now Jews started to become aware of, for the first time in that region, about their soul's inherent value, as Kabbalah teaches, and the depth of their relationship with God. It's not just about doing things, and they're not just here at random, they're not just one of 7 billion, but each one is a whole world themselves. And as they began to understand the godly potential found in every single individual, and not only in every individual, it's not only people, every creation, every rock, every atom. I'm not going to use the scientific, but the point is, everything that exists in this world is here for a reason. And he enlightened them to this, and people took to it. They said, ooh, that's a nice teaching. That's insightful. Of course, there were many who still opposed it, particularly some of the great scholars who said, not only are you taking the schleppers, the simple people, and you're trying to now, uplift them to scholars like us, but you're even taking the deep secrets? How dare you do that? But there was a little bit of a difference between the style of the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal. Whereas the Arizal remained in Tzfat, in northern Israel, and he taught his students, and he told them to spread his teachings, the Baal Shem Tov did not stay in Mezhebush, where his shul was based. The Baal Shem Tov would travel himself, and he would take along many of his followers as Hasidim with, and they would go to all the towns and the villages in his vicinity. And he traveled far and near. He even tried to get to Israel. Very famous story of the Baal Shem Tov trying to spend Pesach in Israel, and he didn't make it. He wound up instead spending Pesach, anyone know where? In Constantinople, Turkey. Probably Istanbul, I think, is Constantinople. And there's so many stories about his journeys where he visited Jewish communities and small Jewish shtetlach. And he would visit the young and the old. He would visit the simple people and the scholars. He didn't discriminate. He wanted to inspire them, but not from afar, but in person, to teach them personally from the well springs of the Torah. And also, I think he went in a much simpler way. If you look at the teachings of the Arizal, they're a little bit more sophisticated. The Baal Shem Tov was about simplifying it, about making it accessible and easy to understand for everyone. And he used, what's one of the best ways that we understand things? Metaphors. He used captivating stories and anecdotes, parables, and powerful interpretations. And he made deep Kabbalistic concepts relevant and meaningful. You'll notice that in general, when a story is used, people tend to listen a little bit more. So I'm telling you all about the Baal Shem Tov here and what he taught, but within a story, and from deep within, he captured the Jewish imaginations and the hearts and souls. Everyone could appreciate something in his words because he found some way to relate to each person in their own way and personally. It's about personal relationships, not just about the teachings. And so the Baal Shem Tov's methods, they were entirely unconventional. They were very different than most rabbinic figures of the time. Rabbis at the time would typically sit in the center of their communities, right, in their yeshivas, their institutions, and only those who were engaged enough to seek out the rabbi's inspiration could benefit personally from his wisdom. Right? People would come to these rabbis, come to the yeshivas, and learn from them. But the Baal Shem Tov was constantly on the road. He would meet people all over. He would help people, he didn't just care to teach them. He also cared for them personally. As they say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the Baal Shem Tov personified that. And as he became more widely known, more and more people were attracted to this wandering mystic and his mysterious way of life. And so the Baal Shem Tov's followers were dubbed, they were given a name, they were called, and you know what? Hasidim. Excuse me. They were called Hasidim. What does Hasidim mean? Excuse me. Pious ones. Yeah. So, and their teachings were called Chasidus. So this in a nutshell is the year he became the Rebbe. This is a copy of a signature of the Baal Shem Tov, where he signed his name. Might find that interesting just to see. You know, in general in life, anything you want to experience. We're learning about the Baal Shem Tov, so it's always nice to see a little bit about him. You know, so you saw a picture. That's a picture of his shul in Mezhebush. Actually, I'm not sure about that. That looks more like a shtetl. Either way, when I googled his name, that's a picture that came up. Excuse me, there were no pictures in those days. But there are pictures, there's a portrait of him in his old age. I'm sure I'll put it up just now. You may have seen it in the video yesterday. And so the world experienced the birth of the Hasidic movement. In a nutshell, here it is. In the 14th to 16th century, we have the eastward immigration of Jews from Central Europe, like we said, towards Poland in search of improved living conditions. Yeah?
Did that eastward movement follow anti-Semitism in Holland and France and Germany?
I would imagine because, certainly in Germany, there was anti-Semitism. I'm not sure about Holland. I mean, Holland, for the most part, was not an anti-Semitic country. I know there was collaboration with the Nazis and things like that in the Second World War. But I would say, for the most part, Jews of Holland actually had it pretty good. I don't think the Dutch were inherently... Look, there's anti-Semitism everywhere. I was in Amsterdam 20-something years ago as a teenager. I was visiting Amsterdam, and I was there with my friend, and there I met a tall, handsome, old Dutchman. And this man was talking to me. We were outside the Spanish Portuguese synagogue, or maybe it was outside a Holocaust memorial. That's where it was, a Holocaust memorial. And I'm talking to him. Okay, I looked fairly like this. Maybe I didn't have a beard yet then. I was wearing a baseball cap, so you couldn't really see if I have a yarmulke. And I'm just talking to this guy. I'm finding it fascinating. What were you doing during the Holocaust? Don't forget, this is the late 90s. So it's only, 50-something years later. He said he was a member of the government. He was a diplomat. So I asked him, sir, it's very interesting to talk to somebody who wasn't a child then. My father also went through that era, but he was a kid. This man was not a kid then. He was an adult, and he had a government job. He worked in, he was a diplomat. So I asked him, what did you do to help save the Jews? He said, no, nothing. Why would I want to help save them? So I'm looking at him wide-eyed there. I said, well, why not? You don't see human beings enduring such persecution and suffering. Wouldn't you do something to help rescue them? He says, no, the Jews, they're a weird breed of people. And he starts telling me how Jews are a peculiar, enigmatic nation. So I look at him and said, do you know you're talking to a Jew? He says, no. He said, you're Jewish. Oh, I'm so sorry. You must be different. Okay, not he doesn't know me for nothing from bar soap. I just met the guy, right? It was just, I think people were gullible and bought into the hype, the anti-Semitic media, what did they call it, where they basically built these stories that would create caricatures, and they would promulgate stories about Jewish people, and individuals bought into it. The Jews are parasites and are different and are, I don't know what we're trying to do to them. That was what happened there. So push this movement, no doubt, was anti-Semitism in other places. Germany was notoriously known for anti-Semitism. Spain and Portugal expelled their Jews. So Jews were moving eastward. Now, many Jews settled in other countries too. In Turkey, the Ottoman Empire was very welcoming to Jewish people at the time. I think Jews had it good in Turkey probably till the creation of Israel, and even after, because Turkey had decent relations with Israel. Only in more recent years have they become anti-Semitic. But I don't know why a lot of Turkish Jews have actually left Israel, left for Israel. I don't know that history too well, but certainly in more recent decades, the Turks have taken a more of an opposing position against Israel. Maybe that caused a lot more of that. But at that stage, I think it was mostly anti-Semitism, maybe poverty, things like that. No doubt anti-Semitism played a major, major role in the push of Jews moving that way. Many of the countries, the Crusades, France and Germany were notorious, and probably surrounding countries. England, Jews weren't allowed to live in England until around that same era. When did Jews get back to England? When did I think his name was Menashe ben Israel? He was a Dutch-British Jew who moved from Holland back to England. He convinced the British Parliament that they wanted the Jewish people back. Jews were expelled from England before they were expelled from Spain and Portugal. In the 1200s already, Jews were expelled from England. And in York, I once went to York with my friends. There's a custom not to stay in York overnight. You know why? Because, 800 years ago or so, they gathered all the Jews of York, they put them into a tower, and they incinerated them. They burned them over in that tower. And since then, it was a custom that Jews do not stay in York overnight. Jews didn't have it easy in many, many countries.
I know from Spain and Portugal they went to Holland, some to France.
Yeah.
And like you just said, Holland was kinder to them.
Yes.
And then to the east of Holland is Germany.
Right.
Which you said earlier they considered a good place to be.
I'm sure Germany, interestingly, I don't know if it ever expelled all its Jews, but the Crusades certainly came out of France and Germany, and the Crusaders burnt, they actually murdered many Jews. And in Germany, there's many stories about Jews of Germany and France in the Middle Ages who went through terrible persecution. There were forced conversions to Christianity. and all types of other horrible problems. Now, let's go from there into the teachings. All right, but you need to change your glasses in order to do so. Because so far we were just doing a little bit of the story. And I say change the glasses for two reasons. From a Hasidic perspective, you always have to look at the good in others. I'm reminded of a person who was kvetching and complaining that everything is not clean in the house, and telling their domestic helper, "You don't clean anything properly." Until one day, she took off her glasses and realized, oh, it was her own glasses that were the problem. So sometimes in life we have to, change our glasses. And in that perspective, the teachings of Hasidus go in a whole different level. Let's first go into maybe the mystical teachings, just to understand what it's about. How does the Hasidic movement, in fact, differ from the Lurianic teachings? And maybe, Rabbi Isaac Luria presented teachings of Kabbalah somewhat more accessible than before him. So it's true that the Baal Shem Tov's mission was to teach the Torah's inner dimension to every single Jew he could meet, while the Kabbalists who lived in Sfat typically operated in more small defined groups. They certainly had very interesting ways. When you go to Israel, I was once spent a Shabbos in Kibbutz Lavi, which is in northern Israel. And there, what they did with us, they took us outside and they said, we need to give you the experience of how the Kabbalists would welcome Shabbos. They would go out into the fields, and as they would watch the sun setting over the horizon and bid farewell to the week that was, and embrace and welcome the new week of Shabbos. And when we sang Lecha Dodi, do you know that by Boi V'Shalom we turn around? Boi V'Shalom Materet Bala Kamberina V'Tzala. So when we turn around, explain to us, it's so to say embracing everything we experienced in the past week. Sometimes we want to say, just get away from me. The past week was a horror. Right? They wanted to embrace it and realize the benefits of it. Either way, the Kabbalists had their way, and the Baal Shem Tov obviously took and gleaned ideas from it, but he gave it his own twist. And I think his style was somewhat different, and let's try to understand it by examining the following. Life is like an onion. Atzibala. How would you say that life is like an onion? What would you say? Okay. You say it's layered. All right. What do you say? They both have unpleasant smells. All right. They make us cry. Okay, fine. Life makes us cry sometimes. That's true, like an onion. Yeah, sometimes like an onion, we also get fried up. They come in different colors. Now, I'm sure some of these similarities between life and onions are definitely true as well. But as we could see, as Rosalind said, the most onion-like feature that we see is that the onion has many layers. In an onion, it's impossible to find one layer below without peeling away another layer that's above. And similarly, to arrive at a deeper understanding of life and the world around us, we have to peel away layer after layer. Everything in the universe, everything in the human experience is made up of these layers. Now, to the casual observer, all we see is the outermost, the superficial peel. But if you continue to explore and peel away existing paradigms, even with our skin, we shed layers of skin as well. There's our dermis, and there's the epidermis, and below it. Now, don't try peeling away your skin, because it's not going to look too good. But in life, if you continue to explore and peel away the different layers, then we could reach deeper perspectives and insights. And this layering we could realize in things like the study of physics. And for that, we have Miriam to enlighten us.
Sorry, I'm going to put on another hat.
Yeah,
Biology.
biology.
What the onion makes me think of as you're talking is yes, there are layers, but the really important part of the onion is that small little section in the middle which has the potential for growth.
Oh, this like the seed. Yeah.
And except that this is a bulb. But sorry, biologist, that little inner thing of growth that the onion has, each one of us has too.
Mm, very true. And that's something deep that Hasidus teaches. I won't be able to go into the depth of it and teach it to you from the most scientific way. But I'm going to ask you to. How about light? Okay, if we look at the nature of light, okay, to the naked eye, what do we see? We have the room is bright. There's light. And it comes from a source. Whether the source is the globe, is the light bulb up there, or the sunshine, right? We have light. But what happens if I want to go a little bit deeper? Maybe put the light under the microscope. Can we try to capture the sun and put it under the microscope? In Chelm, there once was a group of, the Chelmites were very brilliant people. They didn't want an ayin hara, any superstition on their brilliance, so they told all types of jokes about how stupid they were. So one of the stories go that one evening, the Jews in Chelm were looking in a pond of water, and they saw the reflection of the moon. They said, amazing, we caught the moon. I mean, we thought it's so far away. Look at that, we caught the moon. So they took a bin, and they scooped up the moon, and they locked it in the bin, in this little, bottle, what do you call it, a little bottle barrel or something. They put the lid on, and the next day they brought it into the shul to show everybody where they caught the moon. And when they opened the thing, and the water was still there, but the moon escaped. So if we were to somehow take the sun and put it under the microscope, right, would we see things a little bit differently? What would we see? What's the I shouldn't say etymology, the root, the source? What would a scientist see, right? Tell us about the electromagnetic radiation that you see in light.
First of all, cut out the microscope.
Oh, no microscope there. We need a telescope for the sun.
No. Because for both of those instruments,
Yeah.
you need light to be there. You don't know how to use the light. So you've got to use other methods. And it'll take a year to explain. But basically, it's the electromagnetic radiation, which is just to spark people's interest. Energy. It's energy. Energy travels around the universe in two forms. One is sound, which is minor. All other forms of energy travel in the form of electromagnetic radiation. So to my Hasidic mind, it says electromagnetic radiation is the way Hashem communicates with us throughout the universe.
Yep, it's true. And only at a wavelength that's perceptible to the human eye, because there must be layers and layers deeper than that we can't perceive, right?
Absolutely, and the deepest one is the light of Hashem, the light of Torah.
Exactly. So, I mean, you have waves and you have particles and all that other shtick that we can't necessarily understand. It's not relatable, only to some degree that's actually perceptible to us. The sun also has a core. Okay? So,
And that's the source of the energy. Just like Hashem is at the core of everything, and that's the source of our energy.
absolutely. Let's look at our table as another example. We all see a wooden table in front of us. Yes? Now, when we look at it, what am I seeing? I'm seeing here a board, a piece of wood that was nicely shellacked and whatever they did to this, standing on these legs beneath it. Okay? Looks good. It's doing what I need. But what if you take it into the lab and you start prodding a little bit further? And what are we going to find? That this table is formed by a unique combination of what?
Let's go deeper. If you really go, it's formed
Okay?
If you go into the atom, there's nothing. Ayin, one of the names of Hashem.
Ayin.
Nothing. This table is actually mostly empty space.
Okay? So we're going into the science lab now. And we're getting a taste of the protons and the neutrons and the electrons and all these things that are zipping around. And now we take those further and deeper into the lab and we discover it's actually nothing. It's all garnished. What, all those high speeds, it's all part of, you see, we're uncovering the layers of the onion. Okay? And each thing has a deeper form of matter beneath it, as our in-house scientist in residence tells us. And so all you have to do is to look. Now, with my naked eyes, I can't look, right? I don't know. All I see is a table. Okay, but I do know that if my scientist will tell me how to look deeper, and look, you know, you've ever been to Cape Point? At Cape Point, they claim that the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans meet. And I said, where do they meet exactly? Don't you see that line over there? I never get to see it. I can't figure it out. Huh? You see it. You actually see a line. For real.
Cold water and warm water.
Okay. Could you actually feel a temperature difference in the two sides? Right there. Next to each other.
It's a gradual change because they're mixing. But if you go 50 meters this side, it's definitely warmer than 50 meters that side.
Okay. I'm amazed because to me and many people who I've mentioned this to, they're like, yeah. They make it's sightseeing, it's tourism. They convince everybody. They just made some arbitrary line. They say this is where it meets, and everybody comes to see it and pay big bucks to go to Cape Point. And they sold more tickets. Either way, I guess you need the right perceptible eye with which to see it. Maybe I have to clean my glasses next time.
Ask the people who swim
Yeah?
the distance from Cape Town to Robben Island. Ask them about sea temperature.
Okay, I guess all you have to do is look and feel, and you realize that what appears simple to my eye, what I can't see, but those who are swimming it or those who are studying it can't see. It's never so simple. There's always a deeper layer. And this, in essence, is what Kabbalah is all about. It is the art of peeling away the layers, of teaching us how to physically shake the lulav and esrog, how to light the Shabbos candles, how to eat our matzah, how to do all the mitzvahs that we do. We engage them with our five senses, right? We do all those things. But when you study Kabbalah, you know to go a little bit deeper, to peel away that outer layer, and to find that beneath the surface, there's a far more complex and enlightening portrait of not just what we do, but why we do those things, why God instructs us to do them, and how that all fits into the divine will.
Can I just throw something in
Sure.
for my sake and everybody else's? My sake, so that you understand me. Science tells you how things happen. Torah tells you why.
It's very profound. I like that. Science tells you how, and Torah tells you why.
Therefore, there's no contradiction.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. Yep. Now, the thing is, whenever we start peeling away the outer layers of reality to uncover the deeper truths within them, to some degree, people might lose touch with the outer layer. When I'm looking, when I'm going deeper, right? I'm going deeper into something. So my mind shifts away from the reality the way I previously knew it, right? So to get into the very spiritual language of Kabbalah, to understand the various names of God, for example, that Kabbalah speaks of, and the process of creation that Kabbalah describes, and the different kinds of angels that exist, you, to some degree, have to tune out of the surface, the superficial way that we see the world around us and turn into the deeper spiritual reality. Now, what's the problem?
Sometimes we have to be open to the meaning of the superficial. Like, what is the real meaning of the two X in the first word of Bereshit?
Okay, we'll have to get there. All right, now I'm just going on the surface and touching on it. What do you see? Do you see a table, or do you see the protons, neutrons, electrons waving around? When you look at light, are you seeing electromagnetic energy, or are you seeing just practical light? What are you seeing? I see light. I see a wooden table, but I'm asking the scientists, what do you see? Both. Okay, that was the Baal Shem Tov's idea. The Baal Shem Tov said you can't separate the two realities. You have to be aware of their existence, but oftentimes a scientist might look at things from a scientific perspective and forget. How often does it happen? You go to a doctor, you have some issue that you need to discuss with the doctor. All of a sudden, the doctor starts using medical jargon to you, and verstehst nicht kein Wort. Now you say, please speak in English. He said, I just did. I said, no, I mean, like, simple language I can understand. Because the doctor forgets that we're not doctors, we're patients. And the doctor starts talking to us in the language he talks to his fellow doctors, we're not going to understand it. And if a scientist in the lab, they use their scientific jargon, I don't use electromagnetic energy, protons, neutrons, electrons, all these, language in my everyday usage of words. I use it here in a metaphor because you used it. So I'm just, throwing some fancy words around.
No, you make me feel at home. Everything's my fault.
There you go. My point I'm making is that sometimes we might not, since we're on your case today, well, you just leave it on you right now. That the rest of us aren't scientists, and we don't necessarily see it from that perspective. And the same thing the Baal Shem Tov felt about Kabbalists. That a Kabbalist all of a sudden sees the inner workings of God's world and only sees things from that perspective, right? So maybe to the physicist who's looking into the microscope and they see things a certain way, they see what is really going on, but the rest of us don't see it that way. They're not seeing the molecules on the table, okay? We're not seeing the particles. We just see a table here. So the thing that the Baal Shem Tov had a problem with, not a problem, but what he tried to do was not just to share Kabbalah and that everybody will become mystical and start talking mystical language, Kabbalistically, and we'll have a nice new lexicon. But he didn't feel that was the point. His goal was that the two should merge with each other. So that when a scientist is talking, they're not just using scientific language to the masses, but maybe they could even explain to a little child how, well, it's true that you're seeing a table here, and it's true that in your food you see what looks nice and tastes yummy and is good, but also there's nutrition and there's health benefits in a way that's palpable, that the child understands and appreciates, and is not just some jargon. Yeah? Sure.
First of all, ask those who were here for my science and Torah shiur, did they understand what I was saying?
We didn't say you not. We're talking about others.
No, but it's a point. And you mentioned the table several times.
Yeah.
And I am sure that there is a question in people's minds that they are too shy to ask.
Uh-oh.
How, if you say it's solid and my hand doesn't go through, and I say it's empty, and given the right circumstances, my hand can go through, how can we reconcile, like the Baal Shem Tov, how can we reconcile the two opinions? So I need to clarify for people so that they don't walk out of here in confusion.
So how do you?
What makes a solid is the speed, the velocity of the particles, how fast they're going. They're going too fast for you to actually get your hand through before you're bombarded by particles. So that's the difference between the science perspective and the Torah perspective. And all the way through the Baal Shem Tov's teachings and all the way through my teachings, you will find that they are reconcilable. If you look deep enough, you can understand both points of view.
Yeah, that's the point. That is exactly what the Baal Shem Tov wanted to achieve. He didn't want it to be two different worlds, like Miriam saying science and Torah, or science and reality. And the Baal Shem Tov, the same thing. When he was teaching, not science, but he was teaching Kabbalah, he didn't want it to be a different universe that was unrelatable, that it's just, the experts understand. He wanted a person to not only be aware of the divine core of reality, but for that awareness to actually change one's perception of reality on the surface, and that you should experience it and live it. Chassidus wants us to identify what's really going on and to redefine every aspect of our life with that perspective. And that was the idea of the Baal Shem Tov. So it's ultimately like a pair of eyeglasses in that sense, maybe, which allows us to see inside out, allows us to see what was really happening, the other side of things. And these lenses hopefully don't blur our view. It's true that when I walk out of a science class, I'm usually with a blurred view, but maybe because either the teacher or the student wasn't connecting. But if I put on the right set of glasses and I'm open and perceptive, then I will hopefully walk out like the Baal Shem Tov wanted, where both realities are not contradictory or just two different universes. They don't even have to be contradictory, but are two different universes, but rather, I could experience everything through the light of, through the perspective of Chassidus, of Kabbalah. I mean, that was the idea of Chassidus. So that was the idea, the ability to change the narrative of reality, to see things not just the way we see them, superficially, but to go into the depth of it, to show us the inside story. So when you look at a passage of Chumash, or a halacha in the code of Jewish law and Shulchan Aruch, or when you look at a story in the Talmud, what we're not just seeing is some kind of peculiar Jewish custom, right? You could be able to see it not just as his story, as we say here, but our story. What is its pragmatic relevance to me today? Yeah.
I'm not sure which of the Babich already said what I'm going to say next, but one of them, and I suspect it was the seventh one, said the following: the Baal Shem Tov's teachings were the beginning of the wellsprings, the beginning of the age of redemption, the time of Mashiach. Started with the Baal Shem Tov.
Yep. Yep. And in fact, the Baal Shem Tov himself, maybe we'll conclude today with a video and a story. And guess what? I didn't even get into the three teachings. We just got into the introduction of it. How do I do that? So hopefully the idea, though, is without going into the teachings themselves today, and next week we really want to focus on Rosh Hashanah, so I'm not going to do them next week. Maybe just remind me another time to go into the three specific teachings. I'll tell you them in a nutshell, where Chassidus put a tremendous emphasis not only on studying cerebrally, but it's called avoda. What's avoda? Digesting it, making these teachings part of our lives. Many people study and it just remains, intellectual, academic ideas. The idea of Chassidus was to train ourselves to take these Kabbalistic perspectives and to see the spiritual reality as the reality, the inside-out approach, that it becomes intuitive, that it becomes our default way of thinking, behaving, and reacting to the world around us because we're in tune with it. And that was the idea of part of what the Baal Shem Tov wanted to achieve. Maybe I'll go through very quickly just those ideas on the slideshow, because I'm not going to have time to go through in great detail. But I gave you the metaphor of a table and sunshine, that you don't just see it from the superficiality, but you could see the core reality, which is what Kabbalah wanted us to see. Again, I think using science as an example to illustrate this, we understand that there's also a mystical way. And maybe that's why people who like science also like Kabbalah, because you could see the inner core of every reality. And that's the idea of Hasidus, is to refocus our understanding, our perspective of the way that we see things. Here is a teaching from Rabbi Shalom Dov Bershnerson, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he said the teachings of Kabbalah made man out of godliness, whereas the teachings of Hasidus made godliness out of man. And the idea, of course, was that if we are to see everything as it is, but not just the idea, but if it becomes internal, then we could see a lot more. The three teachings, pardon? I go back a slide for a second. I wouldn't have time to really go through it in detail. I'm going to skim read it. I'll read it to you very quickly. Okay, this is a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, divine providence, as he calls it in Hebrew, hashgacha pratis, extends to this world as much as it does to the supernal realms. Events ranging from the journey of a detached leaf fluttering in the wind. Science might call this the butterfly effect. So the Baal Shem Tov, I don't know if he studied science, but he definitely taught the same idea as the butterfly effect. And what is it? What's that?
He did study because Rambam was a scientist.
Yeah.
Ramban was a scientist.
No, we know that many of them were. I don't know about the Baal Shem Tov personally if he was known for it. But either way, what he was teaching people is, what does the butterfly effect tell us? That nothing's at random. Maybe a butterfly flaps its wings on one end of the world, and somehow the entire ecology, the whole ecosystem of the world is affected by it in very simple terms. The Baal Shem Tov told his students to pick up a leaf on the ground, and they saw a worm underneath it. Said, okay, big deal. And he said, no, you don't understand. That little worm was suffering from the blazing heat of the sun. So what did Almighty God in his unbelievable wisdom and what God created called nature do? That a butterfly somewhere else in the world flapped its wing. And ultimately that caused a whole system of winds to blow. And eventually it caused this branch to shake. And eventually this leaf fell and brought protection and shade to this little worm. That was the Baal Shem Tov's teaching that we could see. And he said all this is called divine providence. Nothing in the world is at random. In the way a secular perspective of life is, well, what's the middle letters of the word life? If things are coincidental. If this happens and that happens, they call it nature. We see nature as part of the way God made the world. It's not a contradiction. Yes, nature is a mechanism created by God. And therefore, what is the Hebrew word for life? Chaim. What is the middle letter of the word Chaim? Hashem's name. We see the divine providence in everything. That was the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. So here is the idea. Onion, if you're looking at it without glasses, you might say, my life is a result of a bunch of coincidences. Things just happen at random. I have no control. It's just stuff happening. But if you start looking at it a little bit deeper, we realize God is aware of all creatures and events. The fact that I'm born means I matter. I'm indispensable to God's plan. And each of them is required to fulfill the goal of creation. I'm not here at random. I'm not some mistake that my parents made by mistake. No, part of the divine plan of the world. And if I go even deeper with the onion, and I'm wearing glasses now so I don't cry, oh, I see things even better. Spending more time, I'm uncovering more layers of the onion. What have I discovered? That everything in my life advances me toward my purpose to fulfill the divine mission that God dispatched me and put me into this world for. So this is what happens when we see things deeper. That's one teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Teaching number one, I said, is hashgacha pratis. There's many teachings. I'm just taking 3 of his teachings today on his birthday to enlighten, to share with us those 3 perspectives. Number 2, he tells us every one of us is as dear to God as an only child born to parents in their old age, and even more so. Why did he use this metaphor? Because he himself was a child, a lat lamaki, born in his parents' old age. And therefore he said, as God's only child, my identity, we don't see it. I mean, this is just an onion without glasses. My identity is based on my own actions. I'm the result of my own mistakes, blah, blah, blah. But I go deeper. He said, I realize that my inner personality is pure. Nothing can change the fact that God loves me, that God cares for me, that I am the most important. I'm the apple of God's eye. And therefore, he said, if you put on those glasses, you won't see yourself as a shmata and a shlenta and Murphy's Law, blah, 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 all the excuses we make why we don't have to succeed and take action. Instead, he says, I'm the king's son, and God loves me eternally. And this is the time to tell you that the Baal Shem Tov said we can learn a lesson from everything in life. So his students asked him, how could we learn from that atheist Jew out there who doesn't even believe in God? The Baal Shem Tov said, very simple. When somebody's facing trouble, learn from the atheist. The atheist doesn't say, oh, God will help. No. Don't blame it on God to help them. You go out there and help them. Because that's why God put you in this world, to go out there and help another. Let me see if this video. Okay, there's no words. It's just watch it for a moment. So that was the second teaching, the idea that Baal Shem Tov was saying that every one of us is here like a beloved child of God, and we all have a purpose, we all have a function we should do. And this ties into the third teaching, where he told us, why do we come in this world? For 70 or 80 years, I guess that was the average lifespan in those days, maybe, in the Jewish community, who knows. But he said, we come into this world 70 or 80 years just to do a favor for another, both physically, and he says even more so, spiritually. And this is, again, a wonderful teaching. Baal Shem Tov says that we don't just share a biological DNA, but we have a spiritual DNA as a Jewish people. And I guess you could even apply that beyond to humanity. And so if we just look at it from a superficial perspective, we say, hey, what do we have to do with anybody else? I live in my own world. It's a dog world out there. I want to win the rat race of life. Remember, though, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. The Baal Shem Tov said, no, we all share a spiritual DNA, and all the more so, if I base my relationship of love on the fact that we are one big family, we are here for each other, we care for each other, we do what family does for each other. And that was the third teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, with which we'll conclude today's shiur, where he taught how we have to care for one another to the best of our ability. There is a lot more, and there's even more in my presentation, but I'm going to end it here. And what you might see on the slide, I don't know if you can read it properly, but the Rebbe is writing a letter. A person wrote a letter to the Rebbe thanking him for sending us shluchim to help one small Jew out in this island of Caraco. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And the Rebbe's response, let me see if I could somehow make it bigger, that you could actually see the words that the Rebbe writes to him. But the Rebbe highlights these words about, don't say one small Jew, like the tremendous potential that you have. And it's very powerful because the Rebbe lived by these teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. We'll continue, please God. Monday, we're going to get into a pre-Yom Tov series. We'll look at some aspects of getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. Maybe we'll look at some particular areas of the Machzor. I'm not sure yet. I will put together some slides, some presentation, so that we can get ready for Yom Tov in the most meaningful and beautiful way. Thank you, everyone. We wish you a pleasant and safe trip. Go safely, come back safely. Don't mess with the black rhinos there. The lions are more dangerous. Enjoy the trip. See you all, please, God, next week. Don't miss the